We will be in John chapter 21 today. I have a fairly large set of texts. So if we make it all the way through, great. If not, then great. And if we do, and one of the teachers after me chooses to jump back to it, then there's enough here that it could be warranted to do that. We're in John chapter 21, and we're going to cover the whole chapter. So we're not going to have the luxury of going incredibly deep in the text today. There's a lot that could be said in here, but we are going to at least explore the text a little bit and see what we can pull from it, okay? John chapter 25. You're going to start off with the opening of the chapter begins with the disciples having the idea of going out to fish. This is John chapter 21, beginning in verses 1 and following. Jesus appears to the disciples at the Sea of Galilee. I think some of your translations may call it the Sea of Tiberias, but it's the Sea of Galilee, same thing, just different name. And it happened this way: the Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. So this almost kind of starts off like a song. I feel like it's, y'all know the little song, there's a boat in the sea, boat in the Sea of Galilee. Y'all know that one? I feel like we're starting that song right now. When you start going through this list, you have Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, James, John, and two others who are out in the boat fishing. Or they get this idea. Peter says, hey, let's go fishing. And they say, okay, well, that's verse 3. I'm going out fishing, Peter says. And so then the others are like, well, hey, that sounds like a great idea. Let's all go fishing together. And why would they do that?
That's what they were.
That's what they were. I mean, they were professional fishermen before Jesus came along. How many times did they probably go fishing while Jesus was along? We don't know a whole lot of times. Or actually, we're not told of any times that they were all fishing together. I guess there probably was a time or two because Jesus would be like, yeah, go get a fish for money and whatnot. But we'd probably be ignorant to say that they never fished with Jesus. Maybe Jesus fished with them. Who knows? For those of you who are fishermen, I see Chris back here. How often do you think of going fishing? So when we think of fishing, most fishermen, if they've got the bite, they are addicted to it. Now, granted, this is their job. This is how they made money. So it's a little different when it's a job. However, they're fishermen. They have to make money. And there's a chance they enjoy it because Peter's sitting there and says, hey, I'm going to go fishing. I ain't got nothing else to do, so this is what I'm going to do. They say, hey, we'll go with you. That's verse 3. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. It was not uncommon to fish late evening over the nighttime. The goal was to bring the fish in for early in the morning to the markets so people could come buy their fresh fish in the morning and have fish sometime during that day. They lacked the refrigerator or the ice box. Someday in the future, though, they'd have that. But so early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, verse 4. But the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. How come?
Maybe he didn't want them to realize it was Jesus.
Well,
they were a little ways up. It was early morning, so it may not have been completely light.
Yeah. So we're looking at two options. Maybe one, maybe Jesus kind of concealed himself, or maybe, there was a couple of times that people would see him and they didn't really know. I think the two guys on the road to Emmaus. Then we got the second idea is that, some estimates would say that they're, where did I read that at?
It said they weren't very far out.
They weren't very far. So let's just say they're a football field out. Let's say 100 yards out. Well, if you're on one side of the football field and you're looking at a person on the other side of the football field, how well can you tell who it is? Anyone still on the side on ends of the football field? It's a little hard. They're smaller, and if they're waving like this, you might know who they are. But beyond that, they don't know, and so they're looking. And Jesus says, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" So they're close enough that he can yell. Sound travels a little different over water, so they're not too far out. And oh, by the way, here in a minute, Peter's going to do what? He's going to jump in the water. So I don't know how good of a swimmer Peter was, but if he's jumping in the water, chances are he can swim far enough to get to where he needs to go. If you chunk me in the water, I've got maybe 10 feet before I sink, or a shark comes and gets me probably. But maybe Peter's probably a better swimmer than Josh is. Friends, haven't you any fish? Verse 5. No, they answer back. At this point, they might think he's just some local city guy who's waiting to go buy fish and wanting to get it as fresh as he can. Throw your nets on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. They did. They were unable to haul the nets in because of the large number of the fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, who's that? John, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." What made him think that this was the Lord?
The fish.
How come?
Early in the call of Peter, the miraculous draught of fish almost sank the boats.
Called their other boat friends over and said, "Hey, come help us." And they pulled in such a large catch, they were afraid. Isn't that when Peter falls down on his knees at the feet of Jesus and says, I'm unworthy, I'm unfit. It's the Lord. Simon heard him say, "It's the Lord," wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. That's where we say Peter, it would have been really cool had he jumped in the water and actually walked on the water. Wouldn't that have been kind of fun? If this had been the time that he jumped and started walking. Some of your translations, I don't know if they say that he was naked. I don't know if yours do or don't. He's stripped for work. Okay. Some people would say that there's this question of, was he naked or was he still clothed? I take the approach that he probably had. I always wear an undershirt when I have a collared shirt on. I take the approach that he had something on underneath his outer garment. He took his outer garment off. He took his nice clothes off. That's what I do. Like if a flat tire happens on my car, I take my nice shirt off so that I can change the tire. I don't know why I do that. I guess to keep the nice shirt nice, but so I'm taking that approach, that he takes his outer garments off to work, a little easier. And by the way, it is nighttime on the water. What happens at nighttime on the water? It's cool. He's working. So he probably has some form of I'm going to call it a coat. It's just an outer garment. It's a thicker garment to keep him warmer if he wasn't doing anything. If he's working the fish, then he's going to expel some energy. So he grabbed his garment, wrapped it around him, and jumped in the water. And the other disciples followed in the boat. Why did Peter not wait in the boat?
He was excited.
He was excited. What makes him excited?
It's Jesus. He loves Jesus.
This is his best friend. Man, he spent years following. Other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish. They were not far from shore, about 100 yards. There's your football field. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. What is Jesus doing right now? Simple, very simple. I'm not looking theology. I'm looking, what's he doing?
Yeah.
Breakfast. How many of you had breakfast this morning?
No, but I wish I did.
Wish you did. What do we say about breakfast?
Robbie says it's the most important meal of the day.
Most important meal of the day. I like that. I say that too. So that's the most important meal of the day. Very simply, Jesus has made breakfast for the disciples. Why would he do that?
Because he loves his friends in return.
Because he loves his friends in return.
They've been out all night fishing.
Ah, how hungry are you if you stayed up all night working? I'd be hungry too. Notice that the next comment, though, Jesus says in verse 10, bring some of the fish you have just caught. How many fish are on Jesus' fire at this moment?
We don't know.
We don't know. Could Jesus have had enough fish to feed them all already on the fire? He could have. Probably. Why does he ask them to bring more? What's that?
Jesus found around all of them, and people gathered around, and he wanted to leave they were shut up.
Maybe there's the thought that some other people might come wandering along. And they might want to be fed too. They might want a little something to eat.
And also acknowledge that they caught the fish.
Ooh. He acknowledged that they caught the fish. If you've got 153 fish, which, by the way, I didn't make this. Where's that number at? No, it's a little further on. Yeah, verse 11. 153. Some people have tried to hypothesize that there was 153 deities at the time, and so Jesus is trying, or there were 153 species of fish, and so they're trying to say that they caught one of every kind of fish. I don't know. I mean, my opinion, it's worth what you're paying for right now, is that just symbolized a lot of fish. It was enough fish that the fishermen felt like counting them. And it was a number that they were like, wow, we haven't caught this many fish ever. So I look at this and I say that there's probably nothing magical about the 153, but it's a number that's written down to tell us how many fish were caught. And I look at Jesus asking them to bring the fish in, and I'm reminded of a little boy who brought a lunch to Jesus. And what was that lunch that the little boy brought? Fish and bread. What is Jesus feeding the disciples here?
Fish and bread.
Fish and bread. You know, in the first account, there was a little boy who brought his sack lunch to Jesus, and Jesus was able to make enough for 5,000 men, plus the women and children and all that other stuff, and have 12 baskets of food left over. In this account, place the little boy as the disciples. Jesus asks them to bring what they have so that he can make something great out of it.
I think
Now,
he's getting ready to teach them a lesson.
The Bible is full of these allusions and connections.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at this as we're supposed to think back to the lessons of God's provision and God's ability to take care of and provide, because the call is about to come in our text, particularly the call for Peter, but the call really for all of them is happening in this set of text. So I'm looking at it and saying, Jesus is looking back to a time when a little boy brought a sack lunch and he turned it into a way to feed the world. And in this case, change the little boy for the disciples. Bring me some of your fish. And Jesus is going to feed them. Now, it's also interesting to me that I think, Jesus, it doesn't say that Jesus had a net, Jesus had a pole, Jesus had anything, but he had the fish. I don't know how those fish got there. And I'm not going to pretend. Yeah, I'm thinking, poof, but I'm not going to pretend to know how he got those fish there, except I think they popped up. Bring some of the fish you've caught, verse 10. Simon climbed back in the boat, dragged the net ashore. It was so large, so full of fish, 153 to be exact, but the net was not torn. Yet again, we're meant to see this as a miracle. This is abnormal and uncommon. Come and have breakfast, verse 12. None of the disciples dared ask, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus gave them bread, gave them fish in verse 13. And this was the third time Jesus appeared to them. Why do you think they were silent? Why did they not ask, "Is this the Lord?"
I think the incident with the fish would have told them. especially Peter, James, and John. So, you've got a guy out here that says, I caught no fish. He says, okay, try it again, and you catch fish instantly. So they don't need
the proof.
They don't need a further explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't believe he was in a state where they recognize him?
I find it interesting. I believe he could be recognized, but I find it interesting that John makes that comment that they didn't ask. That's what I'm puzzled by. Now, there could be nothing there. It could be exactly as Greg said. They already know. And even if they don't recognize the body, they know. My question always comes is, papyrus and stuff to write with was expensive at that time. So this was important enough for John to write down. Why was it that important? That's my only questions to it.
Well, and it says dare, which makes a different thought
Yeah.
than just not asking them. Dare,
It's weird.
yeah.
But also, weren't they struggling with the idea that he wasn't just mortal, that he wasn't going to just build an earthly kingdom? Before his death, they still didn't seem to completely understand who and what he was. And then he goes back from the dead. I mean, they could also just be dealing with the fact that, oh, this is what he meant. He told us who he was, and here he is now. We had this completely wrong. We are literally in the presence of the Son of God, not just a great man and a good teacher, but the Son of God. They could have just had that thought for the first time.
Yeah. And maybe the idea of they're still coming to grips with who he is. Because John does tell us there in 14, this was the third time that he's appeared to them.
This is not too far removed from Thomas.
No.
Maybe they didn't want to hear this point.
Yep. We are, this would be the third appearance, so it'd be the second, it'd be one right after Thomas's situation. And so I look at this and I say that, let's go ahead and move through our text so we can get through the chapter, and then we'll come back to some of these thoughts. Beginning in verse 15, my Bible calls this the Reinstatement of Peter. If you remember this account, you can scan through it while we're reading right now. This is where Jesus says, Simon, son of John, there we go. Do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my lambs. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Well, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt. This is verse 17. Because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep. That's the end of verse 17. Most preachers will make a very big deal out of the Greek in this passage. Not that they're wrong and not that they're right. I'm not. When I read this passage, and I'll tell you why. It is true that when Jesus uses the word love in the three accounts, he uses a different version of love in one of the accounts as compared to the other two. The reason I'm not going to make a big deal out of that, and I'll tell you why. Elsewhere in John uses various versions of love interchangeably. In classical Greek literature, phileo, agape, sorry, my phone is going off. I'll silence that, are used in some respects interchangeably. I do not believe that John's intention was for us to sit here and criticize the way Peter was loving Jesus. I think what John's intention is for us to look back at another time when Peter said, I don't love you 3 times. And when was that?
When they had just captured Jesus.
They had just captured Jesus. Peter's running around, and What'd you say? And Peter's denying Jesus. I believe that John's real intention, as I said, is not for us to try and dig into some Greek underlying idea, but is for us to dig into the fact that for 3 times prior, Peter said, I hate the man, I blankety blank hate the man, or don't know the man. That's kind of the Josh Watkins rendition of what happened. And here, what Jesus is doing is he's coming to Peter and he's saying, do you want to undo what you said? Do you want to confess your love for me? Feed my sheep, verse 18. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself. You went and were stretched, and everyone took care of you. But now when you're getting old, you're not going to do those things. Jesus said this to show the death that Peter would die. And then he says, follow me. Jesus is telling Peter what is about to happen, or what's going to happen. Peter does die as a martyr, at least from church tradition and history. And he dies on a cross. I believe, is he the one that's crucified upside down? Yeah. Because he did not feel worthy to be crucified the same way as Jesus. Verse 20, Peter turned, saw that his disciple, whom Jesus loved, was following them. Lord, and then verse 21, Peter said, Lord, what about him? Jesus says in verse 22, and this is kind of an interesting church history point, if I want him to remain until I return, what's that to you? You follow me. There was a time, and actually we see it in other parts of our biblical text, where people thought, or historical text, where people thought that John would not die before Jesus returned. Boy, that sure makes it interesting, wouldn't it? Because how long has John been dead now? Well, pretty short, about 2,000 years, just a few years short of it. The church built this tradition or this history off of this conversation to say that Jesus would return before John died because of this comment. What do you think Jesus was really saying to Peter?
Mind your own business.
Mind your own business. It doesn't matter what I have for John, which, by the way, John's going to end up, I think he's one of the only disciples, if I remember correct, that actually dies of natural death. And by the way, his natural death, I think, still came after tarring and feathering and beatings and everything else that man endured. But mind your own business. It doesn't matter what I have planned for anyone else down the line. You follow me. Verse 24 and 25. This disciple wrote these things down. And that if there was a writing of every miracle, everything that Jesus ever did, there would not be enough room for all the books in all the world. A little bit of a hyperbole, but however, it's a beautiful one. As we look at this text, I'm going to just give you a couple of applications for you to run with, and then we'll leave the text in your hands for the day. I look back at the breakfast, the situation where Jesus sits down with them and has a breakfast together. And I'm reminded of the phrase that Robbie would share. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I look at breakfast as a preparatory meal for what's to come. When you wake up, you have a meal. It is designed to kickstart you for the day that is ahead. Jesus, I think, could have chose any other meal, and maybe it's just circumstance, maybe it's just timing. But I think the work that he had in store for the disciples was very serious. A work that he knew they needed the fuel, the energy to go for and do. John chapter 4, verse 35, when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well, or after that situation, he tells the disciples to lift their eyes up and see that the fields are white unto harvest. There was a lot of work to be done in John chapter 4, and I think in some way the ending of John is showing us that the fields are white unto harvest. Oh, and as you transition to the book of Acts, how many thousands of people come to Christ in the opening chapters of the book of Acts? About 15,000, if my memory's correct. And that's just the numbers that are accounted for immediately, that are actually defined. I think the second application that we can look at from this text is do not let your past hinder you in your move forward. When was the last time that Jesus and Peter were around a fire? Before this account. It was the night that Peter denied Jesus. It was a nighttime and there were fires, and Peter was warming himself around a fire when people noticed him. And then you have this fire that Peter is warming himself around, except this time he's in a better relationship. I think John's wanting us to recall that night very intentionally. And so as I look at this, I see that there is a part of Peter, if I were Peter, that would want to look back and would want to say, I'm unworthy, I'm unfit. I can't even be trusted with the simple commands to follow you and to do so without question or without fault. But Jesus speaks a grace to Peter that says it's not about what you did that time. Follow me now. Jesus, when he talks to the woman caught in adultery, and this is in John chapter 8, Jesus stood with the woman after he had made his comment, he who is without sin cast the first stone. He's playing in the sand, and he looks up and he says, woman, where are they? No one condemned you? Neither do I. Go and sin no more. I think that's a powerful application for us, because oftentimes we allow our pasts to stop us from the work that we're called to do now and in the future. Third thing the application that I would pull from the text is for us to go and to do. Jesus is calling Peter and the other disciples to action. He's doing so when he's telling Peter, feed my sheep. It's a call to action for Peter to actually go, to be involved in the work that he is supposed to be involved with. And this was Jesus' response to Peter's declaration of love. I think in some way we should think about the new command that Jesus gives in John 13, that you love one another just as I have loved you. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. I think following Jesus, if we truly love Jesus, is synonymous with loving other people. And I read somewhere, I think it was on Facebook, it was a cute little phrase that said, I can only love God as much as I'm willing to love my enemy. I thought that was interesting. How much do we love Jesus? And how much do we love other people? That's all that I have. What comments would you have that you'd like to share?
I think we should connect this with the Luke 22 passage of where Jesus tells Peter that you are going to deny me. And then he says, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And you, when you have been turned back, strengthen your brothers. So Peter is, as we talked about weeks ago, about a personal encounter with Jesus alone, was restored in relationship, but here he is restored to service. And he is following that role of strengthening the disciples and then eventually leading the infant church.
And boy, does he lead. What does he would thank you for that, Greg?
I think it's interesting that Jesus pursues him. Like, this makes the approach and say, hey, make sure this relationship is rooted, or I want to once again call you to your commitment to me and to our work. It wasn't him going to Jesus and begging and saying, please give me a job to do again. He continued his work and he kind of jumped back in, not assuming he's pretending nothing happened or trying to get rid of it, but Jesus goes directly to him, and I think that's important to point out too. Not only does our past not define what can happen in the future, but that Jesus is still right there pursuing us the whole time. And so
that Jesus pursues the relationship. Thank you. Thank y'all very much for your attention this morning. It is 15 after, so we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you for joining us online. It's always a joy to see those that are joining with us today. So thank you very much. And God's blessings will be joining over to our worship.